Hey everyone, welcome back. So since starting this channel, I noticed that I've gotten a couple of questions about asking professors or supervisors for letters of recommendation. And I've noticed that the overarching theme seems to be I feel like it's going to be awkward asking them. And I totally remember feeling that way and being in that same position, having those same worries. So this kind of made me think back to that time, and I kind of started to wonder if I still have all of the application materials I used for when I was asking for letters, and I happen to still have them, so I wanted to use them today to give you all some tips and tricks to asking your professors for recommendation letters for grad school and hopefully ease your worries a little bit. So let's get into it. So first, starting with the fear of awkwardness, I guess. I think that kind of seems to stem from maybe being afraid that they might say no. If it helps you feel any better, I asked 3 people total and all of mine said yes. Honestly, the worst that can happen is someone will say, no, I don't feel comfortable writing you a letter, or don't feel like I know you well enough to. And honestly, in that case, I would consider it a blessing that they were able to say no rather than writing you a letter that doesn't really speak to your abilities. So I would move on to the next person that you feel knows you well enough to say something positive about you to the admissions committee. Now, hopefully that part made you feel a little bit better, but on the flip side of that, I would consider this practice for awkwardness in grad school. For example, depending on what specialty or what kind of program you're going into, it is not uncommon to be thrown into a room full of strangers and have to do a recorded counseling session with someone that you never met before. And yes, that can be very awkward, especially when you weren't really expecting that. So just consider this like awkwardness practice, I guess. So my first piece of advice is don't underestimate how important these are. I know it can be kind of easy to underestimate how important they are because you're not really doing them yourself, someone else is, and you're kind of putting all your focus in the things you are doing yourself, like your personal statement essay. But these are so important because it is another person's view of you and your abilities, and it's also coming from someone who is likely already in the field themselves and knows what it takes to be a successful grad student and a successful professional in that field. These also can hold a lot of weight because, for example, let's say you're applying to a PhD program in cognitive psychology. So you're probably going to get your letters written by other cognitive psychologist faculty members, and chances are pretty likely that people in the admissions committee to the schools you are applying for have at least heard of, or maybe even met, or might even be friends with the other cognitive psychologists that you had write your letter. So I think those can hold a lot of weight if they are in the same discipline as the other people who are going to be reading your letter, if that makes sense. Also, lastly, these can make up for any weaknesses that you have in your application, whether it be GRE test scores, or GPA, or whatever it may be that you don't feel is very strong in your application. Recommendation letters can really address that, and even sometimes your professors or whoever you ask for your letters may be willing to speak to that and let them know that that's not really characteristic of you, or maybe you had an outside situation that kind of influenced your test score or your grades. So sometimes those can be worked in to kind of try to address whatever those weaknesses are and let the admissions committee know why that is. So moving on, in my experience, most programs tend to ask for around 2 to 3 recommendation letters on average, I would say. And as far as who to ask, it really depends on what type of program you're wanting to get into. So for example, if you're applying to a very research-oriented social psychology PhD or something like that, you're likely going to have all 3 of your recommendation letters written by other faculty members, professors, researchers. You get the point. On the other hand, let's say you're wanting to go into more of a clinically focused master's in social work or something along those lines, you're going to likely want more of a mixture between professors and maybe, for example, internship supervisors who can kind of speak to your more clinical abilities. However, I will say it doesn't strictly need to be only those people. I know some have a hard time kind of getting to know professors outside of the classroom, or they have full-time jobs outside of class and it makes it hard to do extracurriculars or internships or work in a research lab or things like that. But in my opinion, I think you can get creative with who you ask. For example, let's say maybe you worked at like a daycare or something during undergrad. You could possibly ask your boss at the daycare to write you a letter, and maybe they could speak to your abilities to interact with kids and the families, or your ability to problem solve. In my opinion, something like this would go a lot further than asking a professor who doesn't know you that well and only really knows that you got an A in their class sophomore year. So I think you can get creative in terms of asking who you think would have the most positive things to say about you. Now moving on, in my experience, opinions seem to kind of be split half and half as far as how you should ask these people, but as a general rule, you should just ask them if they feel comfortable and feel that they know you well enough to be able to write a meaningful recommendation letter. Personally, what I did is I asked this within an email sent to each person and said that if they did feel comfortable doing so, that I would like to schedule a meeting with them to go over my application materials and give them whatever they may need to write a great letter. And I will say, if you do schedule meetings with professors or other professionals, I know time can be a factor in school, but try to look as presentable as you can. You don't have to like wear a suit or anything like that, but definitely make sure that you don't look like you just rolled out of bed, for example, like I look like right now. Also, as far as asking, the earlier the better. I would say give them at least 6 to 8 weeks to write your letter. Asking them to do it within a time frame that's less than 4 weeks is really considered rude, so try to schedule ahead of time and make sure that they have plenty of time to get everything done. Next, one of the tips that I like to share the most often in terms of recommendation letters is always make sure that you give your letter writer some sort of folder or packet with all of your information in it. As you can imagine, especially in a larger school like mine, this is something that happens commonly, and professors get asked to write letters of recommendation basically all the time. So you want to make sure that none of your materials gets mixed up with another student or something like that, and you want to make sure that you make it easy for them to be organized and get everything done. As far as what you should put in this folder, for example, I made a little table on Word or something like that showed the school I was applying to, what kind of program it was, the deadline for that school, and how they would submit their letter, just so they could see all in one place all the letters they had to write and which school required it submitted which way, because sometimes it can get confusing. Also, this allows them to set deadlines for themselves so they know which letter is due first and which one is due last. Other things you should include in your folder is your resume or CV, a copy of your unofficial transcript. I would also include some sort of draft of your personal statement. It's okay if it's not a final draft or it's not perfect, but even just a very rough draft would be better than nothing. This way they can get to know you on more of a personal level if they don't already, and they can also include some of what you put in your statement in your letter if that's what they choose to do. You'll also want to include just a short list of all of the things you did for that person or with that person. So if it was a professor, you would list the classes that you took with them and the grades you got for that class. And for an internship, the same thing. Whatever your responsibilities were, the dates that you worked with them, how many hours you worked with them. Also, this could apply to both classes or research or internships, but any type of paper or project that you did for that class or that person that you think you did a really good job on and really shows your abilities, I would include that in the folder, so maybe it can kind of jog their memory. For example, if you took a class with them a couple of years ago, this way they can remember who wrote that paper and things like that. Also, this is probably kind of a given, but definitely include your contact info. And lastly, I think this goes a really long way. Make sure you include a short little handwritten thank you note. I think this strategy of having a little folder to give each of your letter writers is really important, so they can have all of the materials they need to write a successful letter and have it all in one place and not feel like they have to chase you down for additional info. My next piece of advice, and this is also a really big one that I think many people don't know about. On your online application, they're going to ask you if you waive your rights to see the letters of recommendation before they get submitted by the letter writer. Always waive your right. Always choose, yes, I waive my rights to see the letter before it's submitted. It can kind of be a red flag of sorts to the admissions committee if you say that you need to see the letter before it gets handed in, because they kind of wonder what it is you're afraid for them to see or why you might be insecure about what someone might say in a letter. So I know it can be kind of tempting to want to know what people said about you in the letter. I still don't know what my letter said, but it's always best to waive your right to see them because it does look better to the admissions committee. As far as more practical stuff, for the most part, these are submitted online. I didn't have any that were submitted via mail I don't believe, and especially today with everything that's going on with the virus and stuff, I would say that most are going to be submitted online, but let's just say on the off chance that it is submitted via mail, probably goes without saying, but do provide each person with an already addressed envelope with the stamp already on it, because they're doing you a huge favor already. The last thing you want to do is inconvenience them in any way or make them pay for something. But I will say most likely these are going to be submitted online, usually in your online application portal or whatever it's called. They will ask for the email addresses of your 2 or 3 recommenders that you want, so make sure that you have the correct professional email of each person you want to write your letter for you and enter it correctly into your application portal. After that, they'll get sent an email and then they can use that tool to submit it. And my last piece of advice is always make sure you're checking regularly if those letters have been submitted or not. The last thing you want to do is wait till the very last day only to see that one person forgot to submit theirs or it didn't go through correctly, and then you're kind of scrambling to get everything in on time. So I would say check your online application portal to see if it's been submitted. Most times it'll say if it has been or not, and if it doesn't, you can always just call the school program and see if they've gotten that. If your professor or supervisor, whoever it is that's writing your letter, forgets or you think that they need a little reminder, do not do any rude reminders or anything like that. Avoid doing that at all. Just write a follow-up thank you email and they will get the message. That's always better than, doing the kind of rude reminder emails. And that's all I have for you guys today. I hope that was helpful. I know this can be a really stressful time and there's a lot to think about. I know that it can be kind of awkward or nerve-wracking to ask people to do such a huge favor for you, but I hope that this helped ease your worries a little bit and made you feel a little more confident asking for letters. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.